Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tire Pod. We are back right after the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix in Imola. Shez, I'm tired, but how are you doing?
Good, good. It was a
Good.
late race for me. I had a little bit of a nap. Now I'm back and I'm ready to go.
Great. Yeah, it was an early start for me. But yeah, I mean that's kind of where we're at, right? With these races. We're back in Europe now. And what do you make of the race? What's one word you would use to describe the race?
Duality. It was pretty dull for quite a bit of it. Like there were simmering tensions, and we didn't quite know where the fight was going to come, and then it just exploded at the end and it lit up at the end, and we had a really close fight to the finish, which was good.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought that this was going to end up being, one of the more dull races of the season, thinking back to the first couple of races. And then all of a sudden, we had a bit of a gem of a fight with about less than 10 laps remaining or thereabouts. And that became interesting. But I think we have to start at the most obvious place, right? Which is Max being Super Max. I mean, in my opinion, he kind of won the race yesterday because this was one of those tracks where having track position kind of meant everything. And we thought that there would be a safety car, as has been the record at this circuit, 100%, which is now going to be less than 100%. That never happened. And therefore, I think track position in the end saved him, but he has himself to give some credit for, right?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about his pole lap yesterday. It was super important to get that. I think Fernando had said in comms during qualifying that Imola's right up there with Monaco in terms of how difficult it is to pass around the track. And actually, as I was watching it, I have to say I was a little bit depressed because you can just see how massive these cars look going
I was
around
going to say the same. Yeah.
Imola. It looks like a toy track.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah.
Like I remember when they were here in the previous guys as the San Marino Grand Prix, and they were driving around in V8s and V10s, um, and they look so perfectly formed, and now they just look like trucks going around this windy little track. And I was surprised that any passing happened at all. So I was impressed whenever it did. But Max, yeah, did a lot of the hard work on Saturday. Check out our video on his pole lap. But but also his start was impeccable. Lando got, as usual, bogged
First,
down
yeah.
defending himself against the Ferraris. And then his first stint was out as well, doesn't it? Like he was outside of the pit window within sort of 10, 15 laps or whatever. And sort of looked like he was cruising. And I think without that first stint, and without the pace he was able to unleash on the even on the hards at the beginning of that second stint. Yeah, you're right. That race wasn't going to happen. And when you listen to how much he was struggling on the hard tires in that second stint, and the comments that he gave after the race about how difficult it had been, yeah, this was Max winning that race as opposed to anybody else losing it.
I would love to see some way for overtaking to happen a little bit more at this track. I don't quite know how you do it. I don't know how you can expand the racetrack, but I think for the longest time it felt like you would have to be significantly faster to get forward. So even
Yeah,
towards the end, I wasn't quite confident that Lando would be able to get past him because it's one thing to get there, it's another thing to pass another car, and I don't know that that would have happened. But that's why it kind of felt dull for the most part.
I think it's quite tricky around Imola though, because the natural resources around the track make it really
Exactly.
tricky. Like, 30 years since that fateful day. And if you think back to what Tamburello used to be, it's now that sort of chicane that we have. Before it was just one big
Yeah.
curvy corner. And the reason that they hadn't wanted to change it or push the barriers back is because there's a river on the other side of the concrete barrier. Um, and I think that's what makes things a bit difficult at Imola. And it would perhaps lose a bit of its character if that's what you did. Um, so I think that's just how it's going to be. But there's also the fact that for this season, the gravel traps were brought in a bit closer, so mistakes were punished a bit more. You could see how that actually affected drivers in qualifying and the race. So it's kind of those having your cake and eating it kind of
Eating and cake,
situations.
yeah.
We're asking for more jeopardy in the off track. Um,
Well,
I
I
guess
think
we can't complain too
it's
much if that's that's the consequence.
it's simply also largely a byproduct of how big these cars are too, right? If these cars were kind of what the previous generation was, right? I think you would still get a little bit more. I'm not sure you'd get a whole lot more, but you'd still get a little bit more. But I think nonetheless, look, this is one of those weekends where Max had the championship level drive, and that was it. But Red Bull are definitely not in the comfort zone that they were, right? I mean, I think that has now become very, very clear. I'll just look at what Checo Perez did, and even throughout the race, he pretty much
Yeah.
struggled. And this was again one of those straightforward races where you would have thought that he would have been able to make up a whole lot of ground. He did sort of do himself no favors, but when he put it in the gravel trap, right, as you just alluded to, with trying to push a little bit too hard. And I think now, I mean, Red Bull are as vulnerable as they've ever looked. Maybe going back to early 2022 now, in some ways, right, where they kind of have to be on the money. And this weekend they had to rely on their driver to pull them out. Otherwise that's not happening. I mean, I don't know that there's any other driver that could have done what he did, what Max did rather, lap after lap after lap, to kind of just make sure that they win, and he really just kind of put them over the line.
Yeah. Yeah. And to that, I guess we're moving on
Let's do it.
into our little chat about the challenge that Red Bull is going to face. And yeah, I mean, before the race, Vasseur had been talking about how they need to take advantage of Red Bull being in an uncomfortable position, or push them into being in an uncomfortable position in terms of their setup and their plan for the weekend. And both Mercedes and Ferrari talked about just tilting the balance of their car. And I think James Allison had a really good analogy. He called it having a small duvet. The problem that they've had at Mercedes is that if you look back at what they were doing in Jeddah, they had a car that was really wayward in the fast corners, and was better in the low speed corners, and then that switch that they were better in the high speed corners and not so good in the low speed corners. And he called
Yeah.
it like a small duvet, where you cover up your feet and it leaves your head exposed, and you cover up your head, it leaves your feet exposed. And they wanted to make the duvet bigger. And both Ferrari and Mercedes think that they've now got a better base to be able to bring more upgrades. I think Mercedes, apart from the analogy, is slightly outside of this conversation, but certainly McLaren were right on it this weekend, as they
Yeah.
were in
Yeah.
Miami, and Ferrari weren't a million miles away. So tantalizing for the rest of this season. What do you think?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I kind of wish that Ferrari had, I know they've placed a lot of emphasis on stability, and so they have that sort of big fat rear wing, right? That I think really hurt them today. And we say hurt them, but this is really in the margins, really. I mean, we're not talking about a huge gap, but I certainly hope, to your point, that they can build on that. And I kind of was a little bit disappointed what they did with Sainz, and sort of not matching him for Oscar, because again, we talked about track position being key, and they sort of responded a little too late. I wonder if they were just caught a bit napping, or I know Carlos tried to defend them in the end by saying that, look, they were trying to see if there would be a safety car coming in. I guess on balance, I'd give them a little bit of benefit of doubt, because yeah, we were kind of expecting a safety car in this race at some point, and it would have made sense for him to stay out. And had he stayed out, that could have been a different deal altogether, a Miami kind of situation. But I think you're dead on with this sort of three-way fight, and I would say the five drivers max plus the two Ferrari McLaren drivers are. I think now we can start saying it's any given week, right? And it's some of it is going to be track dependent, right? I mean, this was McLaren's track, right, in many ways, and you could kind of see why they were successful, kind of hoping and waiting for some Ferrari tracks to come through now, maybe next weekend.
Why is this not a Ferrari track? Why
This
should it not
this
have
is
been a Ferrari track?
this was more suited to McLaren, right? The medium speed
Is that
corners, and yeah, that's not
yeah?
it's not Ferraris. I mean, and I will say this. I mean, there's been a lot of chatter about, look, the upgrades that Ferrari was bringing. I mean, I was excited. I am still excited about it, but I just, again, I think we've not read. I mean, Fred Vasseur said those things. Jacques Clear did. Carlos Sainz did. I think the only person I heard being more optimistic about this or saying less about it was Charles. I never heard him sort of put down the expectations. Not that he blew it out of the window and said, no, we're going to absolutely win or anything. He's always kind of been very very balanced with it. But I just don't think we're there yet. I think they couldn't quite dial in the setup of the car, and maybe they should have brought the upgrades a week earlier because I think McLaren probably had that chance to take that next step with kind of seeing how their upgrades went. So I don't know. I mean, look, it's a long
But
season, so
yeah, maybe there's a conversation to have at another time. I don't know, but I certainly think that that Ferrari aren't doing quite as well technically as McLaren are doing, right? In that McLaren bring an upgrade, and that race they're a step ahead. You know, they brought an upgrade to Miami, Lando wins the race. And they've turned up in Imola, and you know, they're easily the second fastest, if
I,
not the fastest
I,
over a lap,
I would give
right?
you Imola,
Whereas
but we
Ferrari, but
but
then Ferrari bring a big fat upgrade, and they qualify the same place that they would
it
have
wasn't a
otherwise.
big fat upgrade, number one. Number two,
It wasn't a big fat upgrade.
we talked about Miami being, slightly favorable circumstances too, right? We talked about it, and I don't want to take anything away from Lando because he drove a well-deserving race win, right? He got it, right? But we got to be fair there. And he himself, by the way, has said that he recognized when the safety car came in Miami that happened. And look, again, if this happened here today, it could have been a different story. But at the end of the day, you're right. I mean, McLaren does, they seem to have taken that step further. And I think I'll wait a couple more races. I'll see how Monaco goes, right? It's coming up here fast. And I think the most exciting race of the year will be Silverstone because I think you're legitimately going to have three teams. And maybe in
Yeah,
Mercedes
yeah,
kind of makes the
yeah, and
gap by
and a
then. So
track that allows you to overtake that. But
it's
my yeah, my point here is that Ferrari maybe have more of a correlation issue than maybe they thought
oh,
they
I
would
see what
have.
you're doing here. Okay.
Do
No,
you not think so? Like
no, I don't
McLaren,
think so.
bang,
No,
they see
no,
something
because
on the sim, and it's there on the track, literally the next race.
I look, I'm not going to get into the weeds. I know what you're trying to do here, but uh,
I do
it
nothing.
also took them a whole year, man. The year before at Miami, they were like, I don't know, 25 seconds off the pace. So of course they had the biggest gain to have. I don't think the Ferraris ever dialed it up as well as they would have hoped for. I think that they had a hard time in qualifying, getting their front tires warmed up and ready and dialed in. That really hurt them. Had they qualified, had Charles qualified higher, this would have been a different deal. But I don't want to
They
talk about
didn't have that
Ferrari
pace.
because I do want to give credit to McLaren. I think this is their weekend. I can do that. Even as a Ferrari fan, I can do that. We're going to come back, but we have Monza, we have Monaco. This just wait and watch that. I do want to
Yeah,
tell you.
it
Go ahead.
yeah.
Go ahead.
No. I wasn't going to say anything other than it's nice to see the age-old Ferrari versus McLaren rivalry reignited, even if it's still behind a Red Bull.
Even if it's still behind a Red Bull. And I think again, this is those weekends where one of those weekends where you could have made look, fortune favors the brave, right? And it did in this case favor Max, and he was well deserving of it, right? But this could have been a Ferrari McLaren fight for a race win, right? It could have been, and Norris and Charles were, and look, towards the end, Ferrari did have a little bit of pace in there too, and then I think I think they're just within. It's marginal based on the weekend, based on track temperature now, and I think that we're now living in this era of Formula One where you're gonna see track sensitivity kind of be more of a thing, even with Red Bull now. I think you can say that as well. So that's interesting. I do want to kind of go down this path, right? Keep thinking about poor old Oscar, right? He got the three-place grid penalty. Had
Yes,
probably nothing to do
yes.
with him himself, right? Like that was a team
Nothing to
fault
do
or
with him.
team's fault, right? Had he been in second place, had he started on second on the front row, I think that Max would not have won the race because McLaren then could have done the two-on-one thing with Red Bull and kind of done the over under kind of the overcut undercut, which never quite happened. Largely because he was stuck behind Sainz, and you saw he was infinitely quicker than Sainz, but he was stuck there for I don't know a good right until the pit stop window, right? A
Well,
good
until the pit
25.
stops. Yeah.
So I don't know. I just
Uh, could he have won? Well, as in, yes, I think he probably would have ended up on the podium if he hadn't had that three-place grid penalty. In fact, I think he would have been the leading McLaren if he hadn't had that three-place grid penalty. He would have been, wouldn't he? He would have started on the front row against Max rather than Lando. I'm gonna put it out there, man. I think Oscar, maybe he wouldn't have got past Verstappen, but I would have been more confident in him attacking Verstappen in those final laps than I did about Lando. Lando, bless him, he's quick, but as soon as he gets that red mist, like there's a good result ahead of me. Um, Stuff starts to happen. Like there were two
Mhm.
two instances where on the exit of Villeneuve, he found himself just wide and pushing it. And you could see that into Tosa ahead, Verstappen was vulnerable. He was taking some weird lines into that hairpin. He said afterwards that, I had to take weird lines because the car was about to spit me off the road there. I just had no grip. So he was there for the taking. And I just I didn't have the confidence that Lando would be the guy if even if he was taking half a second a lap out of him, that when he got there, that he was going to be able to overtake him. And he kind of showed that. Like I think he would have been within DRS range earlier without those mistakes into Villeneuve. What do you think? That's
I
just my feeling. And I
we
think that if Oscar had been there, I have nothing to base this on because we've never seen Oscar in that situation.
yeah,
Um,
I
or if
think we
Charles had been there, I
yeah.
think I think I would have been more confident that they were going to catch and potentially pass Max.
We were robbed of the opportunity to do that, see that rather, right? But I think that you're right. I mean, and we in the post quali video we talked about Oscar's driving style too, right? And how he would have been he would have gotten more out of the car, the way he turns the car, the way he has this sort of Jensen Button-ish kind of way to doing things. And you could argue that he would have been more suited to get after Max just based on that alone, right? Like forget the overtaking part or not. And again, if McLaren have a car in second and a car in third, they could do a bit of a split strategy, put again Red Bull out of their game, and maybe Max is pitting a lot earlier, which then means that he has even less grip later on. And I think none of
Yep.
that happened. So, or they could have been ultra aggressive at the beginning to one of them, right? Could have done that. So I think those things never came to fruition, largely because of a very unfortunate impeding penalty, which again it's kind of ironic if you look at this race result and even the last one. At the heart of it is one common theme. Starts with an H, ends with an S. Haas. They're kind of at it. They kind of had an impact on this race, both ways. They kind of impacted the last race too. So that's
So it's
that's what
always
you had.
Kevin
This is
Magnussen as
this
well,
is
isn't it?
this is America making its way into Formula One really this year. This is exactly how it went. But I think you're right. I think Oscar now has seemed like the better driver, even though Lando has the
Mate,
result.
mate, I'm telling you, right?
Um,
So that was, with only half the upgrades, he was
he was
he was
there.
he
Yeah.
was on balance quicker than Lando in Miami. And here, but for a penalty, I think he would have been leading the charge. And like I said, that calmness on the radio, that calmness in his inputs, I think I think we would have like I said, I would have just had more confidence in Oscar, even only second season in F1 Oscar in that chase than I did in Lando. Sorry, Lando fans.
No, and I don't think that's an unfair criticism of him because again, the only reason why Lando was ahead of Piastri was because McLaren failed to kind of make sure they managed
No
again,
fault of
so no
his.
fault of his own,
Exactly.
right? And without
Exactly.
that toe that Max got from Hulkenberg, he could have been on pole for crying out loud. Actually, both drivers could
Which
have been
which if
one
he
and two.
had, which if he had and still got a three-place grid penalty, that would have put him alongside Lando on the grid, wouldn't it?
Correct. That would have. There, yeah, it would have been fourth, right? So at that point, yeah, you're right. It could have been again. It could have been a very different race had it not been for the penalty. But I also think that this is one of those weekends where now you can say the 2024 season is really up for grabs. Now I'm not going to go so far still and say that Max is not going to win, but I think that there's clearly um, the two teams, Ferrari and McLaren, have clearly caught up to Red Bull, and we're going to have to come back to this in a later debate or topic. But I think the Adrian Newey missing factor is showing up. Now, there's always a little bit of a transition period, so maybe they just need to get over this and
But I mean,
whatever
he's
the
only
window
just
looks like.
come on, he's only just announced that he's leaving. I don't think like his role is is
Well, he doesn't seem to be
pivotal to it.
helping out now, is he? Is he not? Is he?
Well,
Well,
I think it's more the fact that the engineering team are trying to downplay what he did. And I'm looking at this thinking, well, you know, you've downplayed Adrian Newey's input, and now your car's vulnerable. So perhaps you've underestimated how
yeah,
much Adrian Newey was
yeah.
involved in this.
Well, and I think in
Um,
long term, you have to wait and see if they will actually, I don't know if recover is the right word, but kind of be where they're at or expected to be. I mean, but one of the issues with this is right that they have been so dominant for almost 2 years now that we kind of forget that these things tend to be kind of like this weekend, right? They tend to be a little as close as this weekend kind of shows, and it's a thing here, a thing there, a little bit of luck, a little bit of misfortune. That's kind of how most weekends should be going, but the car
yeah, this
design was
is
what it was.
yeah, this is much closer to what I think we all want,
Wanted,
and
yeah.
we're going to start getting some answers about what Max is like in another championship challenge again. It's not really a championship challenge. I think Max has still probably got this. I know we're only 7 races into this season, but he still won a race where he probably shouldn't have. But that speaks to me about the quality that Max has, and he's now starting to demonstrate. We're now going to see whether all of the skills he's learned through the dominant seasons of 22 and 23 are going to translate into his wheel to wheel nous and how to manage a race when he's not necessarily the quickest, or when he has a challenge from behind or even in front, where overtaking the car in front isn't a given like it was, in 22 at Spa. Uh, I'm really excited to see it. I think Imola gives me some confidence, a lot of confidence actually, that Max has got this right. Like that, even in a closer race to race
I'm not doubting.
situation, he's
Yeah,
still got it. But it's just nice to be able to see it now.
yeah, but I also think that, I mean, look, there was a little bit of luck involved in getting that toe, right? I mean, if that toe doesn't happen, it's a different race. It's a different race altogether, right? And so my point is, how many of these weekends are you going to keep getting? Like, is this what we're going to need? Is this what Max needs to do for the remaining 17 races of the year, which is a long ask? And I know they'll have their tracks where they'll be strong, but there'll be tracks where they're non-strong. And now they have not one, but two competitors there, right? And what did we say? The other four drivers, the two McLaren, the two Ferrari drivers, can compete with him. Guess who he doesn't have on his side? Checo, right? And this was a perfect example of that kind of weekend where you kind of would have wanted Checo to be in the mix. Maybe not second, right? Maybe not on the front row with him, but that was a kind of missing element. And look, Max bailed them out, but it was just that close. 2 more laps, 3 more laps, that could have been a different deal altogether. But I think we can be excited, and I'm with you. I'm not going to write Max off or say that he is no more the favorite. He definitely has to be, especially after a race weekend like this. But I do think that Red Bull as a team now have to be on their A game with everything now, and they can no longer kind of have that. That's always a difficult thing to do. It's hard to maintain when people are right next to you. It was easier when they were 20, 25 seconds out, 30 seconds out as well at times, but.
Yeah, this is
Yeah,
it.
that's an interesting one.
Should we talk about Checo,
Yeah, let's do
and
it.
that seat? Uh, so
Interesting.
so Checo was eliminated in quality two, and then finished. What did he finish? Ninth or
I
something?
think so. Ninth.
Eighth.
Yeah, it's way off though. Yeah.
Um, where his teammate, even in under challenging circumstances, won the race. Uh, and what do Red Bull do? Because there are definitely some contenders, and I've got one in mind who I think seems to get dismissed at every opportunity.
I think I know who you're talking about. I think that this was a bad race for him, really, and not again just because of how far away he was. Right, he finished behind the Mercedes, right, and he had to kind of go on this defensive strategy, which um, the only way he would have been bailed out was by a safety car. And again, he didn't look like he had the car underneath him in any way too. It's so I'm not even confident that him being ahead of some of these guys by virtue of qualifying would have helped out. Like we talked about how difficult it was to overtake, but you saw the overtakes that happened on Checo Perez when the race leaders kind of, had boxed and then come through. So it was kind of one of those things. Um, I don't know. I think Red Bull are in a tough position, right? I mean, this is one race right now. And they're doing okay, but I think you have a couple more races and then you kind of have to make a decision, right? Like at what do Red Bull actually want from Checo now? Because the game has changed slightly, right? Like they're gonna want him to be more on it, be right next to Max, and be available in case something happens to Max, and that doesn't seem to be the case, which then leads us to think about whether they have someone from the sister team that might be a better fit for it, which is, I think, who you're alluding to, right?
Yeah, I mean, but Red Bull have got options both within their stable and outside their stable. My question is why? What is it that Yuki, and it's Yuki that I think is the best performing non-Max Verstappen Red Bull family driver right now? What does he have to do to be able to stake his claim for that seat? Can he do anything? Is it just that
Oh,
that
yeah.
the management just aren't ever going to let him be in that seat?
They certainly don't sound keen, do they? Right? For a team like Red Bull, who generally projects these things a little bit in advance of what they try to do. I don't know. It's a bit of a weird thing. I guess my question is, when does Aston Martin get the Honda engines? Is it 26? So I wonder if some of it has to kind of go back to that, right? Because I would have assumed that he would have been a great fit for Aston because Honda has sort of made it very clear that they would like to see him, in racing their engine, right? In whatever car they do
Sure,
decide to go
sure,
with. So I don't know
but
if
this
that
is
has an
this
impact.
this 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 is right now.
What
Red
do
Bull
you
have
think?
got an issue with their second driver. They've got a perfectly good
Are you at
driver at RB who has been developed by their own driver development
are
program.
you advocating
Uh,
for a swap, a mid-season swap? Is that what you're thinking?
I'm just asking, what is it about Yuki that means that they won't let him have that seat? I'm going to put it to you another way, right? Ahead of this season, Daniel Ricciardo was told that you're basically driving, your performances here will dictate whether or not we're going to replace Checo with you, right? If you have Daniel Ricciardo performing the way that Yuki is right now, does he get that seat at Red Bull?
I don't know. My honest answer is I don't know. I really don't.
Really? Because I think the clamor for him to be in that seat, both within Red Bull and outside it, would be pretty high, right? So why is it that Yuki performing at the level he is? Yeah, he out qualified one of the Mercedes on on Saturday, and he was third, wasn't he, in quali two, and then brought the
So
car home in the points.
I
Daniel's
agree.
not doing anything near that.
No,
So 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 why is it that Yuki is dismissed and
I don't
others are not?
I don't think it's that. Well, first of all, I don't genuinely believe that Red Bull are going to put Daniel in Perez's seat. I know they've said that, but look, Red Bull have done so many things over the course of their history for me to not believe what they put out in the public, right? And they're pretty smart at playing that game. I don't think they ever intended to do that. I think that the primary reason for them bringing them back was to light a fire under press such that it might be. I also think that there are some off-track things. There are some commercial interests that are playing a role in all of this, right? Because I think what Checo brings is fairly unique. I'm not sure that Daniel brings the same thing too. So I'm not sure that swap would have happened. Now, if a race result like this continues for a couple more races, I think that changes it. But as a one-off, and look, Checo's generally had a very good season. It was not too long ago that we were
Well,
talking
it's
about.
two in
Look,
a
he's
row then now, isn't it?
yeah,
Because
now he's
Miami
two
wasn't.
in a row. And Miami wasn't great, but okay.
I mean, it
This
was
was
awful.
probably yeah, no, I'm with you, right? I mean, this was two races now. And like I said, one or two more of these. And we're really, I mean, Monaco next week is a bit of a bit of a lottery, right? But But I think again, if he's not in the top six, right, which you kind of hope that they will be, I think that then you have to really start asking some questions. I do think it's coming, right? But I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think my question about this is more like Yuki gets used as a bit of a barometer, right? That I think somebody like Carlos Sainz has much more of a chance of getting into that Red Bull seat than Yuki does. But it's kind of like Yuki gets used to demonstrate that either Perez is not doing well enough, so he needs to be replaced, or that maybe Red Bull have made a mistake about putting Daniel Ricciardo in the RB,
Well,
and that actually they need to be looking outside the stable. It's never Yuki should be the guy in that Red Bull seat, and that's
yeah,
the question I'm asking. Why?
I
Why is that?
mean, I kind of wonder if this some of this has to, and unfairly so, I will add, has to do with his personality, right? I think that when he came on, and we can all kind of agree on this, he acted a bit immature-ish, right? He's kind of behaved in ways that were like slightly childish, and I think it. Look, I personally think it's fine because racing drivers have to kind of wear their heart on their sleeves. Not everyone's going to behave a certain way, and okay, maybe he was a little bit rambunctious and maybe a little bit out of line with certain things. And I wonder if that's kind of made his reputation, right? And I say I'll add that again. That's sort of an unfair way to look at it because he has come a long way. He has done very well this season. I mean, I know Daniel got that position in sprint, but I mean, you can't look at the two of them and say that
Yeah, agreed.
Daniel's really kind of deserving of that. I don't think that's the question. I think this kind of all goes back to whether Yuki gets the seat or not does have to go back to what Max does. Because if Max chooses to leave, then Red Bull have to kind of start thinking about the makeup of their team a certain way. At the moment, I think Checo will stay, but I think you're right. It's it's an argument worth having. Like definitely deserves to kind of be in there, and I wouldn't be surprised.
Or at least in the conversation about that's that it's like
Yeah,
he's not even there. He's a yardstick for other people, but never a contender in his own right. And I don't like that.
yeah. Quite
Yeah,
the thing
let's
this
pivot
week.
onto our
What did
favorite our favorite triers, Mercedes-Benz AMG Petronas. They brought a big upgrade immediately after FP1 and FP2. Toto Wolff is out there saying we're going to have to wait a few more races before we see this car bear fruit. But James Allison, who I have to say is normally a pretty honest commentator. You know, he doesn't wax lyrical when it's not warranted. Uh, Said that the car has a good base. We've got decent correlation, and we're widening that base of operation that means that we can start to actually bring performance with the aero updates that we have in the pipeline. The problem is I've heard this a few too many times before. This sounds different, but it sounded different every time they've said it before. And I think I really need to see something um, tangible on track before I believe it. They seem to have consolidated their place as sort of fourth fastest. Aston took a dip again this weekend, but they're they're they've got a gap now between the leading three and definitely to Red Bull that they need to gap. The other thing was in race, their two drivers are pretty evenly matched, right? They weren't miles away in qualifying, and then in the race as well, you always see them sort of um, circulating in tandem. What did you think of George having to, well, George being brought in to pit towards the end of the race? Were
I
you
mean,
outraged?
no. I honestly I wasn't even paying that
He
much.
just didn't care.
I mean, much like I didn't care. I mean, look, what are we talking about? Like sixth and seventh year, and then George finished like 50 seconds behind Max, and then Lewis finished like a whole half a minute behind Max, right? I mean, what are we doing here? Which look, don't blame me for not being interested. The coverage didn't have Mercedes a whole lot until the that you want to call it a swap happened or whatever. They were trying to go for the fastest lap, and I give them credit for it. Like, look, what difference is it going to make? 6, 7, 7, 6, like It's not like Carlos was way up the field. He was like 10, 11 seconds ahead anyway. Like what difference was it going to make at that point, right? So I think that's much ado about nothing. Again,
Yeah,
they were trying to
yeah,
make a point. And look, at this stage, I will say this. I have blasted Toto Wolff a lot over the last few weeks. I am kind of relatively optimistic about what they're going to do this year, right? And I'm not suggesting that they will be in that three-way fight, although you never know. You get one of these McLaren type upgrades and everything changes. But um, they do seem to have kind of taken that step back, if not in action, but sort of from a mental perspective, sort of like a readjusting expectations. And I
yeah,
think that's a good
yeah,
thing
yeah,
for
yeah,
them.
yeah.
And look,
I
their
agree with
only
that.
goal this year is to try to convince Max. That's it. That's all Toto's got to do, because that's what he's trying to do this year. That's it. They have to show that they have the pieces put together for Max to come in and lead Mercedes back to the pinnacle that they were at. That's all they've got to do.
Yeah, as always, please like, please subscribe, please leave us some comments. We read all of them. We even replied to most of them. Um, we'll see you guys in the next one.
Later.